Page 46, vulnerability without boundaries lead to disconnection, distrust, and engagement. In fact, as we will explore in chapter 4, letting all hang out or boundaryless disclosures is one way we protect ourselves from real vulnerability. And the too much information issue is not even a case of too much vulnerability. Vulnerability is a bankrupt on its own term. When people move from being vulnerable to using vulnerability to deal with unmet needs, get attention, or engage in the shock and our behaviors that are so commonplace in the today cultures. To more effectively dispel the myth that vulnerability is a secret sharing free for all, let's examine the issue of trust. When I talk to groups about importance of being vulnerable, there is always a flood of questions about the need for trust. When do I know if I can trust someone enough to be vulnerable? I would only be vulnerable with someone if I'm sure they won't turn on me. How can you tell who has got your back? How do we build trust with people? The good news is that the answers to these questions emerge from the data. The bad news is that it's a chicken or the egg issue. We need to feel trust to be vulnerable, and we need to be vulnerable in order to be trusted. There is no trust test, no scoring system, no green light that tell us that it's safe to let ourselves be seen. The research participant described trust as a slow building, layered process that happens over time. In our family, we refer to trust as the marble jar. In the middle of third grade, Ellen had her first experience with betrayal. In many elementary school settings, third grade is a big move. Students are no longer clustered with the K2 crowd. They are now navigating the grade 3 to 5 groups. During recess, she had confided in a friend from her class about a funny, slightly embarrassing thing that had happened to her earlier in the day. By lunchtime, all of the girls in her peers group knew her secret and were giving her a hard time. It was an important lesson, but also a painful one, because up to that point, she had never considered the possibility that someone would do that. When she came home, she bursted into tears and told me that she was never going to tell anyone anything again. Her feelings were so hurt. Listening, I felt my heart aching for her. To make matters worse, Ellen told me that the girls were still laughing at her when they returned to the classroom, so much so that her teacher separated them and took some marbles out of the marble jar. Ellen teachers had a large clear glass vase that she and the kids referred to as the marble jar. She kept a bag of colored marbles next to the jar, and whenever the class was collectively making good choices, she would throw some of the marble into the jar. Whenever the class was acting out, breaking rules, or not listening, the teacher would take marbles out of the jar. If and when the marbles made it to the top of the jar, the students would be rewarded with a celebration party. As much as I wanted to pull Ellen close and whisper, not sharing with those girls is a great idea. That way they will never hurt you again. I put my fears and anger aside and started trying to figure out how to talk to her about trust and connections. As I was searching for the right way to translate my own experiences of trust and what I was learning about trust from the research, I thought, ah, the marble jar perfect. I told Ellen to think about her friends as a marble jars. Whenever someone supports you, or is kind to you, or sticks up for you, or honors what you say, what you share with them as private, you put marbles in the jar. When people are mean or disrespectful, share your secrets, marbles come out. When I asked her if it made sense, she nodded her head with excitement and said, "I have got my marble jar friends. I have got my marble jar friends." When I asked her to tell me about it, she described four friends whom she would always count on, who knew some of her secrets and would never tell, and who tell her some of their secrets too. She said, "These are the friends who ask me to sit with them even if they have been asked to sit at the popular kids table." It was such a great moment for both of us when I asked her how her marble jar friends became marble jar friends. She thought about it for a minute and replied, "I'm not sure. How did your marble jar friends get their marbles?" After thinking about it for a while, we both started blurting out our answers. Some of her were they keep our secrets. They tell us their secrets. They remember my birthday. They know who Oma and Oba are. They always make sure I'm included in fun things. They know when I'm sad and ask me why. When I miss school because I'm sick, they ask their mom to call to check on me. And mine exactly the same, except for me. Oma and Oba are Dean and David, my mom and stepdad. When my mom comes to Ellen or Charlie events, it's a great feeling to hear one of my friends say, "Hey, Diane, good to see you." I always think she remembered my mom names. She cares. She paying attention. Trust is built one marble at a time. The chicken or the egg dilemma comes into play when we think about the investment and leap that people in relationship have to make before building process ever begins. The teacher didn't say, "I'm not buying a jar or marbles until I know that the class can collectively make good choices." The jar was there on the first day of school. In fact, by the end of the first day, she had already filled the bottom with a layer of marbles. The kids didn't say, "We are not going to make good choices because we don't believe you will put marbles in the jar." They worked hard and enthusiastically engaged with the marble jar idea based on their teacher work. One of my favorite scholars in the field of relationships is John Gottman. He is considered the country foremost couple researcher uh, be, because of the power and accessibility of his pioneering work on how we connect and build relationships. His book, The Science of Trust, emotional attenuant for couples, and an insightful and wise book on the anatomy of trust and trust building. In an articles on the University of California, Berkeley Greater Good website, Godman described trust building with our partners and in a manner totally consistent with what I found in my research and what Ellen's and I call the marble jar. What I have found through research is that trust is built in very small moments when I call sliding door moments after the movie Sliding Doors. And in any interactions, there is a possibility of connections with your partner or turning away from your partner. Let me give you an example of that from my own relationships. On a night I really wanted to finish a mystery novel, I thought I knew who the killer was, but I was anxious to find out. At one point in the night, I put the novel on my bedside and walked into the bathroom. As I passed the mirrors, I saw my wife's face in the reflections, and she looked sad, brushing her hair. There was a sliding door moment. I had a choice. I could sneak out of the bathroom and think I don't want to deal with her sadness tonight. I want to read my novel, but instead, because I'm sensitive researcher of relationships, I decided to go into the bathroom. I took the brush from her hair and asked, "What's the matter, baby?" And she told me why she was sad. Now, at the moment, I was building trust. I was there for her. I was connecting with her rather than choosing to think only about what I wanted. These are the moment we have discovered that build trust. One such moment is not that important, but if you are always choosing to turn away, then trust erodes in relationships very gradually, very slowly. When we think about betrayals in terms of the marble jar metaphor, most of us think of someone we trust doing something so terrible that it forces us to grab the jar and dump it out every single marble. What's the worst betrayals of trust you can think of? He sleeps. He sleeps with my best friends. She lies about where the money went. He or she chooses someone over me. Someone uses my vulnerability against me. And an act of emotional treason that causes most of us to slam the entire jar to the ground rather than just dumping the marble. All terrible betrayals, definitely, but there is a particular sort of a betrayals that is more insidious and equally corrosive to trust. In fact, this betrayal usually happens long before the other ones. I'm talking about the betrayal of disengagement, of not caring, of letting the connection go, of not being willing to devote time and effort to relationship. The word betrayals evokes experiences of cheating, lying, breaking confidence, failing to defend us to someone else who is uh, go gossiping about us, and not choosing us over other people. These behaviors are certainly betrayals, but they are not the only form of betrayals. If I had to choose the form of betrayal that emerged most frequently from my research, and that was the most dangerous in terms of corroding the trust connections, I would say disengagement. When the people we love or with whom we have a deep connection stop caring, stop paying attention, stop investing, and stop fighting for the relationships, trust begins to slip away and hurt starts seeping in. Disengagement triggers shame and our greatest fears, and the fears of being abandoned, unworthy, and unlovable. What can make this convert betrayal so much more dangerous than something like lie or an affair is that we cannot point to the source of our pain. There is no event, no obvious evidence of brokenness. It can feel crazy making. We may tell disengaged partner, you don't seem to care anymore, but without evidence. of this, the response is, I'm home from work every night by 6 p.m. I tuck in the kids. I'm taking the boys to Little League. What do you want from me? Or at work, we think, why I'm not getting feedback. Tell me you love it. Tell me it sucks. Just tell me something so I know you remember that I work here. With children, action speaks louder than words. When we stop requesting an invitation into their lives by asking about their day, ask them to tell us about their favorite songs, wondering how their friends are doing, then children feel pain and fear, not relief, despite how our teenagers may act, because they can't articulate how they feel about our disengagement. When we stop making an effort with them, they show us by acting out, thinking this is will get their attention. Like trust, most experiences of betrayal happen slowly, one marble at a time. In fact, the overt or big betrayals that I mentioned before are more likely to happen after a period of disengagement and slowly eroding trust. What I have learned about trust professionally and what I have lived personally boils down to this. Trust is a product of vulnerability that grows over time and requires work, attention, and full engagement. Trust isn't a grand gesture, it's growing marble collection. Myth number 4. We can go we can go it alone. Going it alone is a value we hold in a high esteem in our culture. Ironically, even when it comes to cultivating connections, I get the appeal. I have that rugged individualism in my DNA. In fact, one of my very favorite breakup kick ass no one can hurt me songs is White Snakes. Here I go again. If you are a person of a certain age, I would put money down that you have rolled down a window and definitely sunk. And here I go again on my own, like a drifter. I was born to walk alone. If a white snake is in your cup of tea, there are bootstrapping at them in every imaginable genre. In reality, walking alone can feel miserable and dispersing, but we admire the strength it conveys, and going alone is revered in our culture. Well, as much as I love the idea of walking alone down a lonely street of dreams, the vulnerability journey is not the kind of a journey we can make it alone. We need support. We need folks who will let us try on new ways of being without judgment, without judging us. We need a hand to pull us up off the ground when we get kicked down in the arena. And if we live a courageous life, that will happen. Across the course of my research, participants were very clear about their need for support and encouragement and sometimes professional help as they re-engaged with vulnerability in their emotional lives. Most of us are good at giving help, but when it comes to vulnerability, we need to ask for help too. In the Gifts of Imperfections, I write, until we can receive with an open heart, we are never really giving with an open heart. When we attach judgment to receiving help, we know, we knowingly or unknowingly attach judgment to giving help. We all need help. I know I couldn't have done it without reinforcement that included my husband Steve and a great therapist, a stack of books, a mile high, and friends and family members who were in similar journey. Vulnerability begets vulnerability. Courage is a contagious. There is an actually some very persuasive leadership research that supports the idea that asking for support is critical and that vulnerability and courage are contagious. In 2011, Harvard Business Review articles Peter Fuda and Richard Badham uses a series of metaphors to explore how leaders spark and sustain change. One of the metaphors is the snowball. The snowball starts rolling when a leader is willing to be vulnerable with his or her subordinates. The research shows that this act of vulnerability is predictably perceived as courageous by a team member and inspires others to follow suit. Supporting the metaphors of snowballs in the story of Clay Clinton, the managing director of a large German corporation, realized that his directive leadership style was preventing senior managers from taking initiatives. The researchers explained we could have worked in the private to change his behaviors, but instead he stood up at an annual meeting of his top 60 managers, acknowledged his failings, and outlined both of his personal and organizational roles. He admitted that he didn't have all the answers and asked his team for help leading the company. Having studied the transformation that followed this event, the researcher reported that the Clinton effectiveness surged, his team flourished, there were increased initiatives and innovations, and and his or and his organizations went on to outperform much larger competitors. Similar to the story above, my greatest personal and professional transformations happened when I started asking hard questions about how my fear of being vulnerable was holding me back, and when I found that courage to share my struggles and ask for help after running from vulnerability, I found that learning how to lean into the discomfort of uncertainty, risk, emotional exposure was a painful process. I did believe that I could opt out of feeling vulnerable. So when it happens, when the phone rang was unimaginable news, or when I was scared, or when I loved so fiercely that rather than feeling gratitude and joy, I could only prepare for loss. I controlled things. I managed situations and micro-managed the people around me. I performed until there was no energy left to feel. I made what was uncertain certain, no matter what the cost. I stayed so busy that the truth of my hurting and my fear could never catch up. I looked brave on the outside and felt scared on the inside. Slowly, I learned that this shield was too heavy uh, to lug around, and the only thing it really did was keep me from knowing myself and letting myself be known. The shield required that I stay small and quiet behind it so as not to draw attention to my imperfections and vulnerabilities. It was exhausting. I remember a very tender moment from that year when Steve and I were lying on the floor watching Ellen do a series of crazy arming, flinging, and knee slapping dances and tumbles. I looked at Steve and said, "Isn't it funny how I just love her?" that much more for being so vulnerable and inhibited and goofy. I could never do that. Can you imagine knowing that you are loved like that? Steve looked at me and said, I love you exactly like that. Honestly, as someone who rarely risked vulnerability and always steered clearly clear of silly or goofy, it never dawned on me that adults could love each other like that. That I could be loved for my vulnerabilities, not despite them. All of the love and support I received, especially from Steve and Diana, my therapist, allowed me to slowly begin to take more risks, to show up at work and at home in new ways. I took more chances and tried new things like storytelling. I learned how to set new boundaries and say no, even when I was terrified that I was going to piss off a friend or squander a professional opportunity that I would regret. So far, I haven't regretted a single no. Going back to Roosevelt, Man in the Arena speech, I also learned that the people who loved me, the people I really depend on, were never the critics who were pointing at me while I stumbled. They weren't in the bleachers at all. They were with me in the arena, fighting for me and with me. Nothing has transformed my life more than realizing that's a waste of time to evaluate my worstness by weighing the reactions of people in the stands. The people who love me and will be there, regardless of the outcomes, are within the reach. This realization changed everything. That the wife and mother and friend that I know strive to be, I want our home to be a place where we can be our bravest selves and our most fearful selves, where we practice difficult conversations and share our shaming moments from school and work. I want to look at Steve and my kids and say, I'm with you in the arena. And when we fail, we will fail together while daring greatly. We simply cannot learn to be more vulnerable and courageous on our own. Sometimes our first and greatest dare is asking for support.